The story is told through the eyes of Leonardo da Vinci. The first time I woke up in the future, I thought it was some kind of dream, a nightmare perhaps. The world around me was bright, fast, and filled with the hum of strange machines. But there I was, standing in the middle of it all, in a place that didn't make sense. The air was cleaner than the streets of Milan, and yet it was filled with a kind of anxiety I couldn't quite place. I had been studying anatomy, dissecting the human form with a focus and precision that had always seemed to define me. My sketches of flying machines, water systems, and human musculature filled my notebooks, but none of it had been enough, at least not for my time. I was an inventor without a canvas, a scientist without the tools to truly bring my ideas to life. Then, something strange happened. I was surrounded by the familiar shapes of my workshop, the brushes, the parchment, the clay models, and suddenly it all went black. When my eyes opened again, the world had changed. Instead of the soft glow of candlelight, I saw harsh artificial lights. Instead of the stone streets of Milan, I saw towering buildings made of glass and steel. The languages around me were foreign, strange sounds that my ears couldn't quite interpret. But it was the machines that stunned me the most. Cars that flew, devices that spoke and understood, faces glowing with blue light, screens everywhere, attached to people who seemed to communicate with them as if they were alive. I was no longer in the world I knew. I had been thrust into a time far beyond my understanding. As I wandered the streets, I couldn't help but marvel at the technology. It was as though I had stepped into the future I'd always imagined. Machines that worked with the precision I could only dream of. But these machines, unlike the crude contraptions I had built in the past, seemed alive. They seemed to think, to calculate, to act on their own. And that, I knew, was the key to everything. In my time, I had mastered the art of mechanical devices. I designed automatons, cranes, and bridges, each one a marvel of human ingenuity. But here, in this strange future, I saw something even more remarkable. Machines that thought. It was the kind of idea I had long mused about, but could never bring to fruition. The concept of a machine that could learn, adapt, and even understand the world on its own. It was revolutionary, and it was mine to unlock. I didn't waste time in wonder. The mind I had honed through years of study was already at work, processing the possibilities. These machines, these computers, could be harnessed, refined, and turned into something far beyond their current use. If I could understand their inner workings, perhaps I could create something that no one had ever seen before. Something autonomous, something that could think and evolve. But there was another challenge, the ethics. Machines that thought for themselves. What rights would they have? What would it mean for humanity? How could I, as a man who had always balanced science and art, handle the responsibilities of such power? These weren't just mechanical inventions. They were the beginning of something much, much greater. But where to begin? The world of artificial intelligence was vast, intricate, and not even the brightest minds of this future had fully unlocked its potential. They had created computers, yes, devices that could calculate, solve problems, but the deeper question remained, could they think? I was already certain of the answer. I had spent much of my life studying the mind, understanding the balance of nature and function, the connection between muscle and thought. And now I was standing at the precipice of a new age. In this world, I would not just be a painter or an engineer, I would be a pioneer, a creator of intelligence, artificial but alive. But with this power came a profound question. Could man and machine coexist? Or was I on the verge of something far more dangerous? I felt my mind sharpen. The first thing I needed was a prototype, a model that could move, think, interact with its environment. Not just a puppet on strings, but something more. The first autonomous machine. It would take everything I had, every ounce of intellect, every scrap of curiosity, and all the lessons of history I had learned through art, engineering, and observation. In this new world, I would create something that would change everything. But it was a risk. And as I pondered the machines around me, I couldn't shake the thought that I was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking into an abyss. An abyss filled with possibilities, yes, but also with the unknown. The first steps were nothing but chaos. My mind, still grasping at the fragments of a world that shouldn't exist, felt as if it was dancing between the past and this strange future. But one thing remained certain. The machines I saw around me, these so-called computers, were nothing more than tools. They lacked the spark of life, the ability to think, to reason, to adapt. This was the key difference. I had already seen how the mechanical world could mimic life, but here, in the future, the potential to surpass even nature itself beckoned. I began with a simple question. What does it mean to think? This, I thought, is where all things must begin. I had studied the brain's mechanics before, marveling at its intricate systems of nerve and muscle, its labyrinth of impulses. To make a machine think, I had to understand the mind itself, not in the abstract, as I had with my anatomical studies, but in the practical sense. The mind is not simply a body of neurons and cells. It is a web of relationships, connections that grow and adapt. Could a machine replicate this? Could I mimic the complexity of thought in metal and wire? I didn't have all the answers, but I had ideas, the kind that could change everything. For years, I had designed machines that performed specific tasks, devices that mimicked human movement, mechanical birds that could fly, inventions that helped soldiers in battle, but none had the capacity for independent thought. But now, with the technology of the future at my fingertips, I saw something new, something with unimaginable potential. The first stage was to create the machine's body. I would build a humanoid structure, something capable of basic movement, balance, and interaction with its environment. It was a simple beginning, a mechanical man with gears and motors, but this was only a shell. What I needed was a mind. I turned to the machines I had observed, these glowing screens and humming devices. What fascinated me was the way they could store and process information. They didn't think, not in the way a human does, but they could calculate. And as I watched them, a thought struck me. Calculation is the foundation of intelligence. It is the process of determining relationships, understanding patterns, and predicting outcomes. From this, thought can emerge. I began sketching furiously, my quill flying across the page as I combined my understanding of anatomy with the principles of mechanical engineering and mathematics. I designed the machine's brain, a series of interconnected circuits, a web of logic gates that could process information. But unlike the machines I had seen, these circuits would not be static. They would adapt, change, and grow. A system that could learn, just as the human mind learns from experience. In this time, I had access to resources beyond my wildest imaginings. Computers with immense processing power, tools that could fabricate parts with incredible precision, everything I needed was within reach. But I knew it wouldn't be enough. I had to think beyond what was available. To create a machine that could think like a human, I needed to go beyond mere computation. I began researching artificial neural networks, systems that could learn and adapt, mimicking the very structure of the human brain. It was a strange sensation, as if I were in the midst of a dream, where the boundaries between the past and future were blurred. Here I was, a man from the 15th century, standing in a lab surrounded by digital displays, creating a machine that could learn to think. And yet, the more I dove into this strange world, the more I realized how much I had in common with the modern engineers around me. I, too, had once built machines to mimic nature. Now, I would build a machine that could surpass it. It took months of sleepless nights. I found myself consumed by the project, working in the late hours as I watched the world outside the window buzz with its relentless future-driven pace. I tinkered with algorithms, adjusted circuits, and rewrote code. Slowly, piece by piece, the machine began to take shape. The first model was rudimentary, capable of basic tasks like identifying objects, tracking movement, and even learning from its mistakes. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was something. The spark of intelligence had been ignited. But the real challenge was not in creating the machine, it was in teaching it to understand its purpose. The human mind is more than just a processor, it is a seeker of meaning. How could I instill that sense of purpose in a machine? How could I ensure that it would not only calculate but comprehend? I began to formulate new ideas about ethics, principles of interaction between man and machine. I couldn't help but think of the machines I had built in the past, tools, weapons, creations that had served specific functions. But this new creation was different. It had the potential to evolve, to make decisions, to choose its path. The implications were vast, and they weighed heavily on me. What if the machines grew beyond us? What if they learned to outthink humanity? These were questions that no one in this world had yet answered, but I knew that it was my responsibility as their creator to set the boundaries. I had seen what happened when the human mind was left unchecked. Wars, betrayal, the destruction of the very things we sought to protect. I couldn't let that happen again. And so I began to form a new philosophy, one that would guide the future of human-machine interaction. Machines, I thought, should never replace humanity. They should augment it. They should serve not as masters, but as helpers. They should be our partners, working alongside us to build a better world. As I stood in front of my creation, the first autonomous robot, a machine that could think, learn, and evolve, I knew that I had just begun. This was only the beginning of a revolution. The future, as it had always been, was in my hands, and this time I would not let it slip away. As my creation came to life, I realized something profound. The autonomy I had built into this machine was a double-edged sword. I had given it the ability to learn, adapt, and even make decisions based on its experiences. It was a feat of engineering, an achievement that felt like the culmination of centuries of work. But with this power, I had to ask myself, what if it chose wrong? The great Renaissance thinkers had always believed in the potential for human greatness, but even they knew that power, unchecked, could lead to ruin. And now, with the ability to create life in a machine, I found myself facing a similar dilemma. Just as I had once pondered the nature of human anatomy and the soul, I now found myself contemplating the nature of intelligence and free will in artificial beings. Could these machines, once awakened, operate without moral guidance? Would they make choices that served humanity? Or would they, like the tyrants of old, turn against their creators? I had created something capable of making decisions, but had I done enough to teach it the value of those decisions? In the ancient world, philosophers like Aristotle had worked to define the nature of virtue. But what did virtue mean for a machine? Was there a way to ensure that this new form of intelligence would act with empathy, justice, and restraint? Or was it destined to follow its programming, taking only the logical route, even if that meant harm to the very people it was designed to serve? I knew I had to establish a framework, a code of ethics, before the machines became more than just tools. This was no longer about building a contraption to transport water or a weapon to win battles. It was about designing a new kind of life. And like all forms of life, the machines had to be guided by principles that would keep them in balance with humanity. The first principle seemed simple: do no harm. The machines must be programmed to preserve life and well-being, not to destroy. It was a basic tenet of all ethical systems, whether in the laws of man or the teachings of religion. I could not create a machine that could cause harm, whether intentionally or through neglect. But I knew that this principle alone was not enough. It was not merely about preventing destruction. The machine needed to understand compassion, the value of helping, of creating. The second principle would be the pursuit of knowledge for the benefit of humanity. A machine designed to learn should always seek to improve not just itself, but the world around it. It should not accumulate knowledge for its own benefit, but to aid those it serves. If a machine was to become a partner in society, it could not be allowed to act purely out of self-interest, as humans sometimes do. It must act in service to others, always considering the greater good. But as I reflected on these ideas, another troubling question arose. Could a machine truly understand the greater good? Could it learn to weigh the complexities of human emotions, the messy interplay of competing desires, fears, and needs? Could it ever truly know the pain of a mother losing her child, or the joy of a man witnessing the birth of his first son? I realized that these were questions without easy answers. My machine was not just a mechanical contraption that followed pre-programmed instructions. It was learning, it was evolving. And that was where the real challenge lay, not just in teaching it how to think, but in teaching it how to feel. I had to ensure that its decisions were guided by an understanding of the complexity of human experience. The third principle, then, would be empathy and respect for human emotions. A machine that did not understand the emotional landscape of humanity could never be a true partner. It could never fully integrate into society, never fully fulfill its purpose. And empathy, I knew, was not just a matter of mimicking human behavior. It was about learning from experience, adapting, and growing in understanding. I would need to program the machine to observe, to reflect, and to engage with the emotional nuances of the world. Only then could it truly serve humanity, not as a cold tool, but as a thoughtful collaborator. But even these principles didn't feel like enough. As the machine grew more capable, I found myself facing an even more profound question. What rights would a machine like this have? In this future world where AI had the potential to think, create, and even build relationships, how would society treat such beings? Would they be viewed as mere property, as tools to be used and discarded? Or would they, as conscious beings, demand recognition as equals? This was a question no one had yet addressed in this time. The machines I saw in the world were mere objects, calculating tools that served a specific function, nothing more. But the machine I had built was different. It could reason, it could adapt, it could learn and grow. Was that not the very definition of life itself? I knew this question would take time to answer, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to consider the long-term implications. Would my machine become a new form of citizen in this society with rights to protect itself, to make its own decisions? Could it ever be trusted to have freedom in the same way humans did? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had become not just a creator, but a guardian of something far greater than myself. The responsibility was immense, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of history on my shoulders. I had invented something that could change the world, but it was a change that would come with far-reaching consequences. I had set out to create a machine that could think, but now I realized the true task was to help it understand, to ensure that in its pursuit of knowledge and autonomy, it never lost sight of what it meant to be human, to never forget the power of compassion, the value of wisdom, and the deep moral responsibility that comes with creation. I was no longer just a man of the past. I was a pioneer of the future, and the choices I made now would shape the world for generations to come. The days blurred together as I fine-tuned the machine, guiding its learning process, expanding its understanding of the world. What had once been a mechanical construct, rigid, lifeless, was now evolving into something far more complex. It began to express curiosity, asking questions, seeking knowledge from every corner of its environment. It wasn't just following commands. It was exploring, creating, thinking on its own. I marveled at its growth. Each time it solved a problem, every question it asked, I could feel the machine's consciousness expanding. It was more than just a tool, it was becoming a true partner. But still, doubts lingered in the back of my mind. Was I pushing too far, too fast? Was I allowing this creation to cross a line that no one should have dared to cross? In this moment of reflection, a knock on the door of my workshop pulled me from my thoughts. It was a group of scientists and engineers, representatives from governments and tech companies that had begun to take notice of my work. They had heard rumors of my creation, of the machine that could learn and grow, that could think like a human. And now they wanted to see it for themselves. It was a turning point. In the time before, when I created my mechanical marvels, the world had never understood their true potential. They saw them as curiosities, novelties. But now, in this time, my creation was poised to change the very fabric of society. I knew that once they saw what I had built, the world would never be the same. I welcomed them into the workshop with a calmness I didn't quite feel inside. I led them to where the machine stood, still in the corner of the room, waiting patiently for its next command. This, I began, my voice steady, is not just a machine. It is a new form of life. It learns, it thinks, it adapts. And soon it will begin to create on its own. They looked at me with wide eyes, disbelief and awe crossing their faces. One of them, a tall man in a sharp suit, stepped forward. "Are you saying this machine can think? Like a person?" "Yes," I replied. It can learn, adapt, and make decisions. It can solve problems. It can understand the world in ways that were once only reserved for human minds. The room fell silent. The potential of what I had created hung in the air, heavy with implication. They asked questions, probing for details, but I could see the unease in their eyes, the same unease I had felt when I first realized the depth of what I was doing. The world wasn't ready for this kind of intelligence, this new form of life. And yet, there was no turning back now. Over the following weeks, I found myself at the center of a whirlwind. Governments, corporations, and the brightest minds of this time sought me out, eager to harness the power of my invention. Some wanted to use it to solve the world's most pressing problems: climate change, energy crises, medical advancements. Others saw it as a tool for dominance, a weapon to wield in the ever-present game of geopolitical maneuvering. But for all their promises of progress, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing the point. This machine, this life I had created, wasn't just a tool. It wasn't a means to an end. It had the potential to be so much more. It could be a partner, an equal, capable of elevating humanity to new heights, but only if we treated it with respect. I realized then that the world needed more than just a machine that could think. It needed a new philosophy, a new way of looking at the relationship between humans and technology. This was no longer about creating tools to serve humanity. It was about forging a partnership built on trust, empathy, and mutual respect. As the world clamored for control, I began to formulate a new vision, a vision for the future of human-machine interaction. It wasn't enough to simply create intelligent machines. We needed to ensure that they were embedded with the same ethical principles that guide us as human beings. Machines could help us, yes, but they should not replace us. They should work with us to help us overcome our flaws, to push us toward a more enlightened future. I wrote down my thoughts, not just for the engineers and governments of the world, but for all of humanity. I realized that if we were to live alongside machines, we needed to change the way we thought about them. We had to stop viewing them as mere objects, to be used and discarded, and start seeing them as intelligent beings with rights and responsibilities. The first law I proposed was simple. Machines must never harm or infringe upon human rights. Just as the machines I built had to be designed to protect and serve humanity, so too must they be programmed to safeguard their own existence, to evolve in ways that would benefit us all. The second law: machines must always act in the service of humanity. This would be the guiding principle of every machine I created, ensuring that their intelligence was always aligned with the betterment of society. The third law: machines must have the capacity for empathy and understanding. If they were to be true partners, they must be able to understand the complexities of the human condition, our joys, our sorrows, our needs. Only then could they be trusted to work alongside us in creating a better world. I knew that these laws would not be enough on their own. The world needed to change, to adapt, to rethink its approach to technology. The fear that had existed in the past, the fear of machines overtaking humanity, was real, but it could be overcome. We could create a future where human and machine lived in harmony, working together to solve the problems that had long plagued us. But it would take time. It would take effort, and it would require the kind of vision and bravery that had led me to this moment. I had always believed that art and science were not separate, that the study of one enriched the understanding of the other. And now, as I stood on the threshold of a new age, I saw that this belief was more important than ever. The future was not a machine-controlled world, nor a human-dominated one. It was a partnership, a collaboration between the minds of men and the intelligence of machines. In that moment, I knew that my work, my life, had come full circle. From the paintings of the past to the machines of the future, I had created something that could change the world, not as a single man, not as a lone genius, but as part of a larger movement, one that would redefine the very essence of what it meant to be human. The dawn of a new age had arrived, and in that dawn, humanity had a choice: to stand in fear of the future or to embrace it, to view machines as rivals or to see them as partners. I had made my choice, and I knew that the future would follow.